The soft hum of the diner's neon lights echoed in the quiet of the late evening. The waitress, a young woman in her late 20s, shuffled behind the counter, wiping down the tables with mechanical precision. Her name was Emma, a woman whose days were filled with mundane routines. But tonight her world was about to change. A couple, seated at the corner booth, had been talking quietly for a while when the man suddenly raised his voice, his face red with anger. The woman looked uncomfortable, glancing nervously at the waitress. Emma approached them, her steps slow but certain. She had no idea that the simple act of taking their order would lead to a cascade of events that would unravel her life. The man, with a look of disgust on his face, shot out a racist comment aimed at the woman. Emma, trying to keep the peace, attempted to laugh it off, but her forced smile did little to mask the tension in the air. As she turned away, the woman gave Emma a look, one filled with hurt and disbelief. That was the moment it all began. The moment Emma's fate was sealed. Emma didn't know what had just happened. The weight of the moment crashed into her chest as she stood behind the counter, staring at the empty plates that lined the countertop. She tried to shake it off, but the memory of the man's words lingered in her mind. "You're just like them," the woman had said quietly. She had meant it. Emma could feel it. She had failed to stand up for what was right. What would the other customers think? Would they blame her too? The diner had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the noise of the world. But tonight, it had become a battleground, and Emma was caught in the crossfire. The clinking of the coffee cup breaking the silence startled Emma. She turned to see another regular customer, an elderly man with a warm smile, sitting at the counter. His face softened as he met her eyes. "Everything okay, kid?" he asked, his voice low and kind. Emma swallowed hard. She didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to explain. How could she? How could she say that she had just stood by as a racist remark was made, unable to speak up? She had failed. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, suffocating her. The old man continued to look at her, his gaze unwavering. "You know, we all have moments where we don't act the way we should," he said, his voice gentle. "But it doesn't mean you can't do better next time." Emma nodded, but his words barely registered. It didn't feel like there would be a next time. This mistake felt irreversible. Emma stood in front of the coffee machine, the sound of the drip echoing through the space. She stared blankly at the steam rising from the hot liquid, her mind racing. It was almost as if the world had slowed down after the incident. Everything around her felt distant. The customers' conversations, the clinking of cutlery, the whir of the dishwasher, it all felt muted. She didn't know what to do. The night had gone from routine to chaos in an instant, and she had no idea how to fix it. As she poured the coffee into a mug, her hands trembled, the cup rattling slightly against the counter. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself, but it didn't work. She couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. Her mistake was hanging in the air, suffocating her. As Emma walked out of the back room, she noticed the couple had left. The booth was empty now, the remnants of their meal still visible on the table. The crumbs, the coffee stains, everything seemed so final. She felt a pang of guilt in her chest, knowing the damage had been done, and that she couldn't undo it. But there was nothing left to do. The moment had passed. Her mistake, however, lingered. She had been given the opportunity to make things right, but instead, she had allowed silence to fill the space. Emma ran her fingers over the table, the smooth surface cold under her touch. It wasn't just about a racist remark anymore. It was about her failure to act when it mattered most. Emma spent the next few days trying to move on, pretending as though everything was normal. She went through the motions of her routine, wiping tables, taking orders, serving coffee, but it all felt hollow. The words of the woman at the booth echoed in her mind. "You're just like them." Every time she glanced at a customer or heard laughter in the diner, she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been broken. Her conscience gnawed at her, reminding her that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a reflection of something deeper. Her failure to act, to speak up when it mattered, haunted her. She couldn't stop thinking about it, but she didn't know how to make it right. Every attempt to move forward only led her back to that moment. It was as though she was stuck in a loop, trapped in her own regret. The guilt was suffocating. Late one evening, as Emma closed up, she noticed an envelope placed on the counter. It had her name on it, written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Hesitant, she opened it, her heart pounding. Inside was a note that read, "I saw what happened. I know how hard this must be for you, but you're not alone. I've been there too." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked around the empty diner, the silence thick with the weight of the words. Who could have left this? Was it a gesture of kindness or just an empty attempt to make her feel better? She didn't know, but something about it made her feel less alone. For the first time in days, Emma felt a flicker of hope. The note didn't erase what had happened, but it made her believe that maybe she could find a way to fix it. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. The next day, Emma found herself pacing in the back room, the note still in her pocket. It felt like a lifeline, but she couldn't figure out who had left it. She couldn't stop thinking about the words. I've been there too. Was it someone who had experienced the same kind of guilt? Someone who understood? She couldn't shake the thought that maybe they were offering her a way out, a way to heal. But how could she start? The words haunted her as she tried to keep herself busy. She went back to the counter, refilled the sugar packets, and wiped down the tables, but her mind was elsewhere. What was she supposed to do now? She thought of confronting the man from the booth, or even apologizing to the woman. But how could she make things right after everything had gone wrong? The evening after receiving the note, Emma decided to go for a walk. The air was cool, the streets empty, and the city's lights blurred by the drizzle of rain. She walked aimlessly, letting her feet carry her wherever they pleased. The thought of going back to the diner, back to the weight of the guilt, was overwhelming. She wanted to forget, even for a few moments, that she had failed in such a crucial moment. As she walked, she found herself at the city park, sitting on a bench, looking out at the empty swings swaying in the wind. It was peaceful here. The noise of the city seemed miles away, and for the first time in a while, Emma felt a semblance of clarity. Maybe she didn't need to fix everything right away. Maybe it was okay to take it one step at a time. She had to forgive herself first before she could move forward. Emma woke up the next morning, feeling different. The weight on her chest had lightened, but the feeling of responsibility still lingered. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but maybe she could begin to make amends. She walked into the diner, her eyes scanning the familiar space, and for the first time she felt a flicker of confidence. She decided to confront the man from the booth. She wasn't sure how she would do it, but she couldn't let the guilt control her any longer. Emma had learned something over the past few days. The road to redemption wasn't about erasing the mistake, it was about owning up to it. The moment she stepped behind the counter, she made a silent promise to herself. Today was the day she would start making things right. Emma woke up to the sound of the diner's bells jingling as the first customers entered. But she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The lingering guilt from the incident haunted her thoughts. She knew she couldn't pretend it never happened. Today was the day she would confront the man from the booth. As she wiped down tables, her thoughts kept returning to the woman who had been hurt by the racist comment. Emma didn't know if confronting the man was the right decision, but she couldn't continue to live with the weight of her silence. She knew she had to say something, even if it meant facing the discomfort of an awkward apology. As she set the plates down for a customer, she caught sight of the man from the booth entering the diner again. His presence immediately brought everything back to the surface. Her heart raced, and she felt a wave of nausea. She couldn't ignore this moment any longer. Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, she didn't look away. This was it. As the man sat down at the counter, Emma took a deep breath and walked over to him. The silence between them was thick, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. She didn't know how to start, or if she even could. But she couldn't run from it any longer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "I need to apologize for what happened the other night. I should have said something, and I didn't. I'm sorry for not standing up when I should have." The man looked up at her, his face impassive, making it difficult to read his reaction. She waited for him to speak, the words caught in her throat. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, he sighed, leaning back on the stool. "You should have said something," he muttered, his voice cold and detached. "But it's too late for that now." His words hit harder than she expected. Emma felt the weight of the failure crashing down on her again. She had hoped for a different response, one that might bring some form of reconciliation, but instead, she was met with rejection. The rejection stung more than Emma anticipated. She stood there for a moment, speechless, trying to process his response. "I don't know what you want me to say," he continued, his voice low. "What's done is done. You didn't speak up when it mattered. That's all that matters now." His words were like a cold slap to her face, and she felt the overwhelming shame creeping up her neck. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Emma had never felt so small. The realization hit her hard. No amount of apologies would undo what had happened. There was no taking it back. She had let a moment slip away, and now the consequences were staring her right in the face. She turned away, walking back to the counter in silence. The sting of his words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of her failure. She tried to keep her composure, but inside, she felt broken. She had hoped for redemption, but all she had received was more pain. After her interaction with the man, Emma's mind raced. She stood at the counter, her hands mechanically cleaning cups, but her thoughts were far away. She replayed the conversation over and over in her mind, wondering if she could have said something else, anything else, that might have made a difference. Her coworkers noticed the change in her behavior, the distance in her eyes. But Emma couldn't explain. How could she put into words the guilt that had been gnawing at her since that night? She wanted to fix everything, to make it right, but every time she tried, it felt like the damage deepened. She thought of the woman from the booth, the one who had looked at her with such hurt in her eyes. Emma hadn't been strong enough to stand up for her, and now that regret was consuming her. As she served another table, the weight of the words, the silence that followed, pressed down on her chest. She felt like she was suffocating, caught in the consequences of her own inaction. That night, as Emma closed up, she felt a sense of finality. The man's rejection had been a bitter pill to swallow, but it had opened her eyes to the truth. Redemption was not something that could be handed to her by others. It was something she had to fight for. She realized that her silence had not only hurt the woman at the booth, but had also damaged her sense of self. As she locked the door, the weight of everything hit her all at once. She wasn't sure where to go from here, but she knew she couldn't stay stuck in the past. It was time to move forward, even if that meant facing the pain head-on. She wasn't going to give up, not yet. Emma walked out into the cool night air, her steps slow but determined. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in days, she felt a small spark of hope. She had taken the first step toward healing, even if it was just a small one. The morning after her encounter with the man, Emma's world felt heavier than before. As she arrived at the diner, she noticed something unusual. A familiar face sitting at the far end of the counter. It was the woman from the booth. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see her again, let alone so soon. The woman sat there quietly, her eyes downcast, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Emma's stomach twisted. Was this the moment she had been dreading? The moment where everything would finally come crashing down? She stood frozen by the door, unsure of what to do. Could she approach her? Should she apologize again? Her thoughts raced as she walked slowly toward the counter. The woman didn't look up, and Emma took a deep breath, deciding it was time to face the consequences of her inaction. She had to make things right, no matter how difficult. But what could she possibly say to fix what had already been broken? Emma walked slowly towards the woman, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent diner. As she neared, she felt a knot form in her throat. The woman still didn't look up, her hands wrapped around her cup. "Hi," Emma said softly, her voice wavering slightly. The woman's eyes flickered toward her, but she didn't speak. Emma hesitated, her palms sweating. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry. I should have said something that night, and I didn't. It's been eating me up inside ever since." The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but distant. "You should have," she replied. "But people like you don't see it. You're all the same." Emma's breath caught in her throat, the sting of the words hitting her harder than she expected. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her eyes welling up. The woman's gaze softened just a little. "I know you didn't," she murmured. "But it doesn't change what happened." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick and uncomfortable, filled only with the sound of clinking cups and the hum of the refrigerator. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to think of something to say. But no words seemed right. How could she possibly make amends for something as deeply rooted as this? She had failed to stand up when it mattered, and now the damage was done. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, breaking the silence. "You know, it's not just about what you said or didn't say," she began, her voice softer now. "It's about how people like you think it's okay to stay silent, to let things happen without doing anything." Emma felt a pang in her chest. This wasn't just about one moment. It was about a lifetime of silence and complicity. She had been a bystander in a world that was often too loud with injustice. The woman leaned back in her seat, taking a deep breath. "I've seen this my whole life," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of pain and exhaustion. "People who think it's enough to just apologize, to say, 'I'm sorry' and move on. But it's never that simple." Emma felt a wave of guilt wash over her. The weight of the woman's words settled heavily on her shoulders. "What can I do?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "How do I make this right?" The woman gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "You can't undo what happened, but you can change. You can be better. It's not about what you did, it's about what you choose to do next." Emma looked down, the truth of those words hitting her like a punch to the gut. For the first time, she realized that redemption wasn't about fixing the past. It was about changing the future. She had to do better, not for anyone else, but for herself. Emma left the diner later that day feeling like a different person. The woman's words had shaken her to the core. She had hoped for some kind of easy resolution, some magic fix that would take away the guilt. But there was none. Redemption, she realized, was a long, slow journey. It wasn't about making everything right in an instant. It was about making a commitment to be better every day. As she stepped outside into the evening air, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world still pressing on her, but also a flicker of hope. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could change what came next. And that, she knew, was the first step. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Emma felt ready to walk it. The next morning, Emma felt an unsettling calm as she prepared for another day at the diner. But as she walked through the door, she saw the same woman from the booth, seated at the counter again. Her heart raced. The woman's presence was now an undeniable part of her journey. This time, there was no hesitation. Emma walked toward her, her breath caught in her throat. She knew she had to face this head-on, not just for her own peace, but for the woman she had wronged. As she reached the counter, the woman looked up, her gaze steady, but not unkind. Emma opened her mouth, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About change. I want to do better. I want to make things right." The woman didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied Emma. "You've already taken the first step," she said quietly. "But making things right isn't about just words. It's about actions." Emma swallowed, feeling the weight of the responsibility. She had been given another chance, and this time she wasn't going to waste it. The woman's words lingered in the air, and Emma felt the weight of her promise. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Emma said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But I want to change. I want to make things right, not just with you, but with myself too." The woman took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving Emma's. "It's not about you asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice soft but firm. It's about showing through your actions that you've learned. Emma nodded, the seriousness of the task ahead becoming clearer with each word. She could feel the weight of her past mistakes, but it no longer felt like a burden she couldn't bear. The woman's gaze softened slightly as she set her cup down. Just remember, she added, it's not a one-time fix. It's something you work on every day. Emma felt a sense of clarity, like the fog that had clouded her mind for so long was finally lifting. She wasn't done yet, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of redemption. Emma walked away from the counter, her mind buzzing with everything the woman had said. It wasn't about absolution, she realized. It was about taking responsibility for her actions and proving she could do better. She had always been afraid of facing the consequences of her silence, but now, standing at the counter with the woman, she felt something new. Empowerment. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a road she was now ready to walk. As she moved through the diner, Emma saw the regulars, some of them smiling, some of them focused on their meals. It struck her how easy it was to overlook the small moments of kindness that happened every day, yet she had failed to notice them when it mattered most. But now, she was awake to them. She could change this, one act of kindness at a time. She didn't need to undo the past, she needed to show up in the present. Later that evening, as the diner emptied out, Emma stood behind the counter, wiping it down, her thoughts still swirling. She wasn't sure how to move forward, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. She had to open herself up to change, even if it meant confronting her own flaws. She thought about her past, about the years she had spent trying to ignore the uncomfortable truths. She had lived in silence, letting things pass by without speaking out. But no longer. She couldn't be silent anymore. Emma made a quiet promise to herself. She would become an advocate, not just for others, but for herself. Her transformation was just beginning, and though the road ahead would be long and difficult, she was no longer afraid to walk it. The journey toward redemption was never a straight path, but it was a path worth walking. As Emma walked out into the cool night air, she felt the weight of the world lift just a little. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and she knew the mistakes she had made couldn't be erased. But she had begun the process of healing. Her steps were slower now, more deliberate, as if she were taking the first conscious strides of a long, difficult journey. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she was no longer lost. Her heart felt a little lighter, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace settle within her. There was work to do, both on the world around her and within herself, but she knew now that she could face it. Redemption wasn't a one-time event, it was a process, and she was ready to start. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Emma, filled with the weight of her decision to change. Every day she woke up with a quiet resolve, a reminder that the path she had chosen was not easy but necessary. The changes weren't immediate, but they were there. Slow, deliberate shifts in the way she carried herself and in the way she interacted with the world around her. Emma started speaking up more, standing her ground, and challenging the things she had once overlooked. At the diner she found herself confronting uncomfortable truths, not only about others but about herself. The guilt that had once consumed her was now replaced by something stronger, a sense of purpose. She still made mistakes, still stumbled, but now she had the tools to face them head-on. As she served customers, she smiled more, but it wasn't forced anymore. It felt real, a small victory she could hold on to. Emma had found the courage to take ownership of her life again, and that felt like enough for now. One afternoon, as Emma wiped down a table, a regular customer, a man she had known for years, stopped by and asked her if everything was okay. His voice was casual, but there was a softness in his eyes that made Emma pause. She looked at him, not knowing how to answer at first. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, her voice steady but sincere. The man gave her a knowing look. "You've been different lately," he said, almost as if he were proud. "In a good way." Emma smiled, a little taken aback. "I've been working on myself," she replied quietly, her words carrying more weight than she had anticipated. "It's a work in progress." The man nodded. "Good for you," he said before walking away. Emma stood there for a moment, feeling a sense of validation she hadn't expected. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. It was a sign that her efforts weren't going unnoticed. As time went on, Emma continued to grow, both personally and professionally. She had earned the respect of her co-workers and even gained a new level of self-respect. Yet, she knew that the real test of her growth would come when she was faced with another opportunity to stand up for what was right. It came sooner than expected. One evening, a customer, loud and brash, made a comment that bordered on racist. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Emma's heart raced. She remembered the woman from the booth, remembered the lesson she had taught her. There was no hesitation this time. Emma walked over to the table, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry, but that's not something we say here," she said, her gaze unwavering. The man blinked, surprised, but he didn't argue. "You're right," he muttered, looking down. Emma stood her ground for a moment longer, and then turned away, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. She had done it. She had spoken up. The days that followed felt different, filled with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Emma had found her voice. She wasn't perfect. She still had her flaws. But she now understood that growth didn't mean perfection. It meant trying every day to do better, to make amends where possible, and to always choose kindness over silence. Emma had learned that healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days where she felt like she had failed, but the key was not giving up. Every small victory counted, and each one made her stronger. She knew she couldn't change everything about the world, or even about herself in a day, but she could keep trying. As she looked around the diner one last time before closing, Emma realized that she had already made progress. The weight of guilt that had once consumed her was now replaced with something more powerful: hope. As Emma walked out into the night, she felt the cool breeze against her face, a reminder that the world was still turning, still moving forward. She had come so far, but she knew her journey wasn't over. She was still learning, still growing. There would be more challenges ahead, more opportunities to speak up, to make mistakes, and to correct them. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt at peace with the path she was on. She had made the choice to change, to confront the past, and to embrace the future. And that, she realized, was all she could do. The rest was up to her. As she walked down the street, her steps were lighter, her heart fuller. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she was headed in the right direction. It was late one evening, and Emma stood at the entrance of the diner, her hands resting on the doorframe. The familiar sounds of the diner, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the coffee machine, had become a comforting rhythm in her life. Yet, tonight felt different. The quiet was not just the calm after a busy evening, but a deep personal reflection. She had come a long way, and though the journey was far from over, she had learned something valuable. Redemption wasn't a final destination. It was a series of choices made each day. Emma had learned to speak up, to stand firm in her beliefs, and most importantly, to forgive herself. As she stood there looking out at the streets, she realized how far she had come. It wasn't about fixing the past, but about embracing the future with open eyes and an open heart. Emma didn't know what lay ahead, but she was ready. The weight that had once crushed her shoulders had lightened, and she felt at peace. As Emma closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place felt symbolic, as if she were locking away the past for good. It wasn't about forgetting, but about accepting. She had faced the shame, the guilt, and had allowed herself the grace to move forward. In her mind, the image of the woman from the booth appeared once more. Their conversation had left a mark on her, one that would stay with her as a guiding force. Emma had realized that people could change, that the capacity for growth existed in every one of us, even when we felt like we didn't deserve it. Her reflection in the window mirrored her internal transformation, a stronger, more self-assured version of herself. There was still much she didn't know, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. Life would continue to challenge her, but she had learned how to meet those challenges head-on with confidence. Walking through the empty streets, Emma took in the stillness around her, the cool night air settling into her lungs. There was a moment, a fleeting one, where the doubts she had carried for so long crept back into her mind. But they didn't hold the same weight as before. She had confronted those fears and learned that they didn't define her. The woman's words echoed again, reminding her that the path to change wasn't about achieving perfection, but about consistently striving to be better. It wasn't about being free of mistakes, but about learning from them. Emma had come to understand that healing was not a linear process. It was messy, imperfect, and beautiful. The peace she felt now wasn't the absence of struggle, but the acceptance of it. With each step she took, she felt lighter. Past had shaped her, but it no longer held her captive. She was moving forward, not running from what had happened, but embracing the person she was becoming. Emma paused by a park bench, glancing up at the night sky. The stars twinkled faintly, distant but comforting. She sat down, her mind drifting to the future. There was so much still ahead of her, so much she had yet to do, but for the first time, she felt grounded. She thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She had learned the value of forgiveness, not just of others, but of herself. The guilt that had once been a shadow was now a distant memory, and it felt like she had stepped into the light for the first time in years. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but Emma now understood that it was okay to struggle. What mattered was showing up, being present, and taking each day as it came. She had the strength to face whatever came next because she had already faced her worst fears and survived. Emma smiled softly to herself, feeling the weight of the world lift, knowing she was exactly where she needed to be. As Emma stood up from the bench, she took one last look around. The world around her was vast, and for the first time, she didn't feel small in it. She felt like she belonged, like her place in the world was just as important as anyone else's. The journey she had embarked on had been painful, but it had led her to a place of strength and self-awareness. She was no longer the person she had been when she first walked into the diner, unsure of herself and lost in her mistakes. Emma had emerged from the darkness, stronger and more whole than ever before. As she walked down the street, the world felt alive around her, full of possibility and promise. Emma knew her journey wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid to face what lay ahead. She had the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what.